Well, hello there, guys. This is new DM Ariel back to you on a Saturday. It's a beautiful Saturday once again here in Northern California, except it's kind of hazy. The weather has cooled down a little bit, which is nice, but it's very hazy and smoky. And if you hear me sniffle or if the audio is kind of weird, it's because my allergies are kind of flared up, like this really bad air quality from all the fires that we've been having in NorCal, unfortunately, this summer. Some of them are still going on. There's one raging in, there's one going on in the lower lake area, about 10, 50 miles away, which is mostly controlled, but still not good air quality. But be that as it may, I am here with another D&D video, and we're still talking about second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I want to talk about second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Um, I have been wanting to run a campaign based on second edition for a long time, ever since I got my copies of the core books, and it's just seems like a fun amalgamation of the first edition rules, which I really like, but in a better presentation. And it's kind of hard because a lot of people are playing fifth edition, which I also play from time to time, but I haven't been able to find a second edition campaign that I can uh, be part of. And if I want to run a campaign myself, I have to find some players to do face to face at the hobby store and stuff. So it's kind of always, if I can find one online, I probably will do one. But at any rate, I thought today what I would do is talk about some of the optional rules that are found in the Dungeons Master's Guide and in some of the other core supplements of the of AD&D. And so AD&D Second Edition is kind of weird in the sense that there's a lot of um, optional rules. It's sort of like it's better presentation than the previous first edition. But if you go through the player's handbook and you go through the Dungeon Master's Guide, they have a lot of what they call optional rules. So you can incorporate the rules into your system, or you can just flat out ignore them. And it's up to you. They kind of leave it up to you, which is it's kind of good, but it's kind of weird because it's like half, like a good chunk, not a half, but a good chunk of the rules are what they call like optional rules. And so I thought what I would do is kind of break them down a little bit. Now I'm gonna go not gonna go through every rule, of course, but just sort of talk about some of the ones that I think are good and some of the ones which I don't really like, and so I would not incorporate them into a campaign because if for various reasons. So I thought about including. That's kind of what I'm talking about today. But I thought about including for a while sort of a disclaimer to say that I will be talking about some things that are found, or some rules, or some material found in the DMG for second edition. So if you're a player and you don't want, you don't really want to, you're not looking to run a campaign, this might not be as useful. They used to say back then in the books that if don't let your players like look at the material of the DMG because it's for dungeon masters only, and it would kind of ruin some of the surprises and some of the things that the DM could incorporate into the game sessions. But this is an old edition, so I don't think I'm really gonna be. I don't really think I can spoil a game system that is over 30 years old by now. And how many people are really playing second edition? And if you are, and you're again, you're just a player and you're not interested in finding out about some of the content in the DM, then just go ahead and not watch. But for all the other DMs out there, this hopefully, if you're planning to run a second edition campaign, this discussion will be fruitful. Okay, guys, so let's take a look at the optional rules as found in the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. As I mentioned, some of the rules that are optional, I like. One of them is the slow advancement optional rule. Now, in the current version of D&D, everybody pretty much advances at the same rate. But if you watch some of the second edition videos that I've made before, that is not the case here with AD&D, where everybody, depending on your class, will advance at different rates. And the slow advancement rate, if you decide to allow demi-humans, which is any race other than human, unlimited advancement, the book says to consider this option to counteract the demi-humans' long life, slow down their advancement, require demi-humans to earn two, three, or even four times as many experience points as a human in order to advance a level. What this does is this allows the short-lived humans to advance more quickly than their long-lived comrades, who will eventually catch up after the humans die. So, if this solution seems logical and acceptable to the players, then a compromise can be reached. Um, I'm sorry, if this solution seems unacceptable, I should say, to the players, then the DM called for a compromise with the game session. The best compromise, the book says, is to allow demi-humans normal or double cost advancement to their maximum levels. Um, then require them to earn triple or quadruple experience points to advance beyond that point. They will advance very slowly, but the players will still have a goal and the sense of accomplishment that comes with rising a level. So the thing is, they tried really hard to make it a balanced game and to have the classes all balanced, and that's why the humans they can pretty much be any class. They don't have racial restrictions like the demi-humans, like the elves and the gnomes and the other races. So in order to have it all balanced, they had the level progression be different. Another optional rule is exceeding level limits. The book says that demi-human characters with extremely high ability scores in their prime requisites can exceed the racial maximum levels. This is found on page 15 of the DM's guide, and basically what they're talking about here is the racial class and level limits, which were present in second edition, but are absent from fifth edition and some of the later editions of the game. Back in second edition, the character class, a player character could advance to the maximum level possible in a given class, but only if they were human, and everybody else could not go beyond a given level. For example, a human cleric could advance to any level, but the dwarfs were limited to level 10, the elves were limited to level 12, and the gnomes, the higher they could get would be the highest they could get would be ninth level. Same thing for the half elves. The half elves would be 14, and a halfling would be 8. So as you can see, player characters had these level limits. The optional rule was to go ahead and have the demi-human characters with extremely high ability scores in prime requisites exceed the maximum levels. When we talk about prime requisites, because you have to have a requisite score in your abilities in order to be a specific class. For example, you can't be a cleric unless you have a 9 on your wisdom, and you can't have be a fighter unless you had exceptional strength or you had a requirement for strength, which off the top of my head I forget what it is, but it was pretty high, And so the prime requisite bonus given in this optional rule would be like if you have an ability score of 14 or 15, and remember in second edition you can go over 18 with the modifiers, and so if you had an ability score which was 14 or 15, which is high or higher than average, then you could get one additional level. If you have ability score that's 16, 17, 18, or 19, you can get as high as up to four additional levels. So that was a way for them to kind of get demi-humans and the other races to be on par with the humans, even though they advanced slower. With this optional rule, they could exceed the level limits given this requirements and given some of these options, which I think is a good optional rule to have. Doesn't break the game in any way. Let's see, and that was character progression. And another optional rule that they give in the Dungeon Master's Guide is the option for DMs to create a new character class. This is complete optional, and it says the character classes listed in the rules are not the only ones that can exist in AD&D. Many other character classes, either general or highly specialized could also exist. Indeed, a common reaction to players to the character classes is to question why their character can't have the powers or skills of another class. Using the system, using this optimal system, this is now possible. You can even create entirely new classes or combinations of existing character abilities. So the classes in second edition D&D were divided into four groups, as we know: the warriors and the priest class, which included your druids and your clerics, and then you have your Rangers. Well, Rangers were part of the warrior class. So basically everything's kind of segmented. But this is what this optional rule is saying is you can have other classes. There's nothing stopping you from if the DM says so, you can authorize creating new classes outside the system. But they give a whole procedure on how to do that, which is kind of involved. But it basically boils down to having taken some given some ability values to the new classes, and then have them take the base experience points that they would get, and then multiply that by a certain by some multiples. It's kind of a little bit involved, but once you go through it, it's not that bad. But it's interesting though because the book kind of discourages it. It's really weird. They call it an optimal rule, but kind of in the background they're saying, unless you're really an experienced DM, or unless you think that these classes will add some fun and flavor to your campaign, you don't really need them because, for example, some players want to play a Viking. Let's take a Viking, for example. But what is a Viking but a fighter with a certain outlook on life and warfare, it says. A witch is really nothing but a female wizard. A vampire hunter is only a title assumed by a character of any class who is dedicated to the destruction and elimination of these loathsome creatures. So they're saying, we already have fighters, we already have wizards. This is basically just like title. So before creating a character class, stop and ask yourself, is there really a character class that can fill a niche? And then they ask the DMs to think of ways that an existing class could fulfill the goal through role player and choice of proficiencies, as opposed to creating a brand new class. Which is kind of weird. I mean, they call it an optional rule, so you can do it if you're a dungeon master. You can say to your players, well, you can have these new classes. And there's a whole procedure on how to calculate the experience if you play these classes, and what their combat value will be, what their saving throws will be, even what kind of weapons they can use or allowed to use, and then they give some modifiers. But in the background, they also say, well, they're not really needed. I mean, if they're not really needed, you shouldn't really add them because it's just going to complicate your game. It's basically what they're saying. So I guess maybe that's why they made it an optional rule as opposed to a hard, fast rule. And then I wanted to look at combat real quick. The combat optional rules are also interesting in the sense that here we have a whole. Oh, and before I talk about combat, really briefly, I'm going to mention proficiencies because the whole weapons proficiencies and proficiencies in the second edition rule set was completely optional, which is crazy to me. It's like you have a whole chapter or a whole section in the DM's guide and also in the player's handbook about weapon proficiencies, but and non-weapon proficiencies. The thing was weapon proficiencies. The characters can use a weapon and become proficient and get more bonuses to hit and combat. And there was also non-weapon proficiencies, which in later editions became skills. In third edition, we had skills and feats. In second edition, they call them non-weapon proficiencies, but they're basically skills. It's basically your character can add proficiencies and get bonuses in terms of what they can become proficient with, other than a sword and other than a martial weapon. Let me just turn to the player's handbook because they do a better job of explaining it. The non-weapon proficiencies, some of these, they're basically skills. I mean, it's how to use a rope, running, seamanship, like if you're a sailor or are going to be in a seafaring campaign, setting snares, stonemasonry, moving and tracking. If you like a ranger and you're a tracking character, and what else? There's a whole list of mining, for example, navigation, pottery. So you could take any of these. If the DM allowed the non-weapon proficiency, and why wouldn't they? I mean, it's like it just add more flavor to the game, and basically you could also be have weapon specialization. So there's a weapon proficiency and non-weapon. The weapon proficiency is like you could become specialized with like a sword if you're a fighter or any other weapon. When a character specialized with a melee weapon, for example, he or she would gain a +1 bonus to all their attack rolls with that weapon and a +2 bonus to all damage rolls, in addition to bonuses for strength and magic. And if you're not proficient with a weapon, you can still use the dagger, or you can still employ whatever weapon you want, but you're not going to be proficient, so you're going to take a penalty of, usually it was like -2 or whatever it happened to be. So I think that it's kind of crazy that they had this whole proficiency weapon and non-weapon proficiency system built into the rule set, but they made it completely optional. They're saying you can use these rules if you want to add more flavor to your campaign, but you don't really have to. It's really up to you. So the four groups are the warrior, the wizard, the priest, and the rogue. And so the initially for the weapons proficiencies, you get uh, a number of proficiencies depending on your class and depending on your level. And then there's a penalty if you're not proficient. And then if you're incorporating non-weapon proficiencies, they are dependent, contingent on your class and your level as well. This is all summarized in a table number 34 of proficiency slots, which is found in the chapter 5 on page 50 of the second edition player's handbook. And they also kind of give a little brief summary on the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it's not nearly as detailed as the player's guide, um, which gives you all the different tables and different proficiencies that you can choose. And I'm not really going to get into how that works too much because it basically, like I said, depends on class and level. But and this video is supposed to be about optional rules, but it's mind-boggling almost to think that there's a whole section. I mean, this is a long section about proficiencies, which in later editions we know turn into skills. So the optional rules or the proficiency rules, it almost seems like to me like they weren't really sure people would really like to use them or not, and so they sort of made them optional, which seems like kind of strange, but that's the way it was. So I was going to talk a little bit about combat and about some of the optional rules in combat, but that's a longer discussion, and so I might actually just leave that for a later video. But I will add that second edition had a whole mechanic called THACO, and I have added kind of a little tag about THACO where I explain that because it's really important in this rule set. And it wasn't an optional rule; it was a mechanic. But if you're going to play second edition, there are some combat rules that are optional, but you still have to know how THACO works. So so that's why I go into a little bit, and I didn't want this video to be too long, like I said. So we'll just end on that note, and thank you for tuning in, or coming into the channel. And if you like this content, I'll make more. So go ahead and give us a like, or don't forget to subscribe. Like or subscribe the video, and I will talk to you guys next time. Okay, so here we have a copy of my Dragonlance Unsung Heroes, which is a supplement that I bought a while back, picked up a while back, to supplement my Advanced Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And the reason it's a supplement for the AD&D game, and the reason I'm showing this to you now is because it basically has a number of NPCs that you can add to your campaign. Here we have Davider the Wise, and David Wise. I don't know how you say his name exactly. He's a 8th level Knight of the Rose, and he's has a human is a human race with lawful good alignment. So it gives you all the stats. But what I wanted to focus is that THACO number. He's got a THACO number of 13, and THACO is basically a combat a concept in regards to combat that was quite popular in the well, that was part of the mechanic that was it actually wasn't popular. I take that back. It was a lot of people don't like. They think it's kind of a clunky system. But essentially, what THACO is, it's an acronym that stands for to hit armor class 0, to hit armor class 0. And so, in the combat mechanics for AD&D Second Edition, what you do is essentially you take this base number. Like this character had a base number of 13, and you subtract the armor class of the opponent or the person he's going to fight or the monster that he's going to go up against. You take the base number and you subtract the armor class, and then you get when you roll your dice, you basically are able to determine whether you hit the if you get on the D20 roll, if you get like a number equal to the number or higher, then that's a hit. Obviously, if you get below the number, then it's a miss. And so then you would check your damage. So it's let's kind of simplify the way THACO works. So it's a little bit more clunky and more complicated than it needed to be. Other editions, later editions kind of clean that up. But if you're gonna play second edition, or even if you play like a game like Baldur's Gate, which is kind of really popular right now because of the release of Baldur's Gate 3, the old games have been released in a kind of like an expanded edition. And if you want to play those kind of games, those games are kind of have a steep learning curve for some people that are not familiar with the second edition rule set. They're based on second edition rule set, and they do incorporate THACO system as part of their combat mechanics and as part of the game mechanics. So it's essential that people have at least a fundamental understanding of the system. And if you don't, I'm gonna go ahead and link some really good resources and videos that I found online, which do a much better job of explaining the concept in depth. That's how I learned. It's not really a difficult system, but people don't like it because there is some math involved, and it's kind of counterintuitive because in second edition, for example, the armor class is descending. So you start with a 10, which is not really good, and then you can go down all the way to like negative numbers, negative 10. So the lower your armor class is actually better. Negative numbers actually in second edition they mean that you're wearing a magic armor, or your armor class denotes magic, so magical item. Yeah, so it's kind of not really clear. It's kind of hard because what happens is you have to add, if you get negative modifiers, so there's a lot of things that could modify your attack roll, and if you're using a negative your character is wearing an armor class that's negative armor class or a magic armor class, then you subtract, even though it's a negative, you add the that modifier to your calculation. So it can get a little confusing at first, but once you do it, it becomes second nature. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted you to be aware of it. And like I said, I'll link some resources down below, so in the description, so that you can, if you want to, you can become more familiar and you are not going to be stumped by something like THACO.